I need to know everything, who and the what and the where, I need everything. Trust me, I hear what you're saying, but act like it's new what you're telling me. I'm curious, George, I hop in the Porsche, it's 5 and a horse, I'm ready for war, I'm coming for throats, to turn to a ghost, I need to know everything.
Hello and welcome to the Counter Narrative Show. I am your host, Rasheem, and today our episode is Artificial Intelligence and Algorithmic Bias. We are talking today with Dr. Robert Holder. Dr. Robert Holder, thank you so much for being here, joining us, and just like taking the time to break down this topic.
Oh, glad to be here. Thanks for having me, and belated happy birthday.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for mentioning that. So more about Dr. Robert Holder. He has 20 years of experience in artificial intelligence research and application, and has provided machine learning solutions for a variety of clients. He is principal research software engineer.
It's 6 o'clock.
That's my technology. Engineer at Reflective Concepts, where he is currently working to make cybersecurity more effective through machine learning. That is a lot of words and a lot of sci-fi-ish sounding stuff.
We try.
So can you tell us a bit about how did you come to this work of looking into artificial intelligence?
Right. Well, I feel like, I talk with colleagues of mine, and I feel like all our stories are all kind of similar, where we just kind of stumble across the computer and just start messing around with it, and next thing you know, we're hooked. And so I guess a similar thing happened to me. I feel like third or fourth grade, and my dad brought home this broken down computer, and it'd be comical, to compare that computer to what we have nowadays. But I just started tinkering with it because there was games on it, and I started looking at how the games were put together, how they were programmed, and started teaching myself programming. And, fast forward to getting to college, and I was looking for a major, and I was like, wait a minute, these games were kind of fun. Let me mess around with this computer science. And so I got into computer science, and with the computer science, there's a number of fields. Graphics didn't really appeal to me, networks, not so much. But once I started seeing artificial intelligence and started taking those classes, that really resonated with me in terms of being able to approach complex problems in, I think, at the time, pretty novel way.
Wow, so that's an interesting connection. I mean, it's something that I think about as a parent. Just even in you just saying, we had these kind of like broken down, busted, well, by comparison, you say, right, computers, and then also that connection to the ways in which youth are regularly active on video games. Is that a way that you have found in some of your work to get more younger people interested to like connection through video games? Or what do you think that equivalent for a youth would be today to get them kind of motivated and interested in that?
Right. Well, I have mixed feelings about video games. So, constantly my dad would complain about how, the kids just see the computer as just one big, video game console. And I have similar concerns with how I see some of the students I've worked with interacting with computers. I mean, they see it as a thing to consume. They don't necessarily see it as something that they can take and create their own ownership with. So as far as exposing students or anyone to technologies, I mean, video games is a low bar. I just feel like there needs to be some mechanism by which we go beyond that. It's easy to waste a lot of time with computers just for the enjoyment factor without ever actually looking at what's going on behind the scenes.
Yeah.
And so one way that I find to kind of get beyond that is teaching students that computers can be used to solve problems that they see. So something abstract like cybersecurity, well, less so now, but perhaps a few years ago, was somewhat of an abstract concept. That's not something that, say, middle schooler is really going to appreciate.
Right.
But if that middle school student, learns how to use a computer to help solve a real world problem, if we can present them types of scenarios that maybe a computer could be helpful in resolving, that's the type of thing that I think can really in a student's interest.
Mm. In your role at the National Society of Black Engineers, I understand that you do some work where you're interacting with middle, high school students, and you're talking to them also about different career opportunities. And I know STEM is like such a big thing right now. Can you speak a little bit about the work that NSBE does and um, specifically minority youth with this access to technology, and even getting them to, as you said earlier, to really think about it differently, like not just as a consumer, but this is something that you can in fact change upon, you can like
Sure.
modify it.
So I would say there's a couple major initiatives that the National Society of Black Engineers uses. So one is called a pre-college initiative, which is a broad program, but one of the programs underneath it is what we call NSBE Junior. So NSBE is typically for collegiate and professional level individuals, but NSBE Junior typically can exist in middle schools and high schools, and they're typically then mentored by either a collegiate or a professional chapter. And so as part of those weekly meetings, they tend to be weekly, we are able to bring different types of projects to them so they can see, for example, engineering that might relate to buoyancy or boats, electrical engineering, circuits, lights, things like that. When I was working with my NSBE Junior chapter, my background, computer science, my bias was to bring things like Scratch, which is a tool used to teach programming to students of all ages. So I've used it with third graders all the way up to collegiate students. So that's one major initiative that National Society of Black Engineers has. Another one is called SEEK. And I feel bad, I can't remember exactly what it stands for, like Summer Engineering Experience Camp, something like that. And that's for younger students. So PCI typically is for middle schoolers, and when we get to SEEK, that's going to typically be for students younger than that. And so those are summer programs that the National Society of Black Engineers runs at the national level.
Okay, I could definitely see how some of those, and I believe I've heard of NSBE before from a friend of mine, James West. I remember
Oh, yeah.
he was talking to me about NSBE at one point for my godson.
He's a frequent speaker for many of our events.
Oh, I can imagine. I can imagine. I think the first time that he came up for me was there was a young boy, elementary school, third grade. Maybe they were in fifth grade, and they were doing a report, and they were very much interested in engineers, and they happened to stumble upon James West and learned a bit, just a tad bit, and them being in fifth grade, and they got so excited because they learned that he lived in Baltimore.
Yeah.
And so, of course, I'm excited also, and I reached out and I sent him an email. This young man, he wants to be an engineer. Very excited, really would love to meet you. He actually came, met with him, had lunch with him. And that young man is in college right now for engineering.
Good story. I like that. I like that a lot.
Yeah. So making those connections definitely makes a difference. So more to our topic of this piece about artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence seems so vast and so broad and can mean so many things. Everything from like the scary robots coming to eat our brains to my computer that just told me what time it was. I don't even know if that's considered artificial intelligence, or is that, so could you define exactly what that term is? What does that mean?
Well, so there is, understandable confusion because even within computer science, the term artificial intelligence can mean a number of different things. For the purposes of our conversation, I would say that artificial intelligence, I'll give you two definitions. So one would just be getting a computer to do things that it is not naturally good at. So if you think about what a computer is good at, you can think of it as, a big calculator. It's very good at remembering things. It will email things back and forth. It does things that are very well defined. when we start having computers do things that we traditionally only ascribe to human abilities. So for a while, playing chess was a holy grail of artificial intelligence. There's, no way a computer could ever understand chess. Chess is you need intuition, you need human reasoning. And so one of the holy grails of artificial intelligence was, well, if we can get a computer to play chess, well, that's intelligent. And so we've then created this, artificial intelligence, and that's a movement in, moving in the right direction as far as increasing the ability of computers. Now, the funny thing is that once artificial intelligence accomplishes something, it's like the goalposts change. So
Right.
now that we have, chess playing computers everywhere, I mean, the computer that beat Kasparov, way back, what was it, 1998? I mean, that's, very weak compared to the computers nowadays that everyone has the ability to just download onto their phone. So chess and artificial intelligence no longer seems to be, this, unseeable thing to have a computer do. And so what we consider artificial intelligence typically is stuff that we don't know how to teach a computer to do, but then we teach a computer how to do it. And so maybe it's no longer artificial intelligence. But the other definition of artificial intelligence is really how can we get a computer to solve problems, but taking inspiration from the natural world. So you hear a lot about neural networks. Those are at least ostensibly inspired by the way our brains work. You hear things about like stigmergic algorithms, which is based upon how ants find food. We've taken things from how bees find food. And so these types of approaches to problems mimic the natural world. And so in many ways, we consider those within the realm of artificial intelligence as well.
So are people not using the Alan Turing test anymore to test the consciousness to see if computers can think?
Well, that last I checked, that does still exist. So the Turing test, the idea is that you have a computer trying to fool a human into thinking that the computer is a human. And so the human has the ability to ask questions in a text format, and the computer responds with answers. And depending on the type of test, it's either a set amount of time that the computer has to maintain the charade, or there is some other stopping criteria. So I would say that that's a controversial approach. I mean, it does help advance the science, of course, because anytime you have an interesting, hard problem to solve and you apply effort towards it, you're going to make some progress. As far as what we consider intelligence, the ability for a computer to fool a human into thinking that the computer is human, I don't know that everyone agrees that that's necessarily the best marker for intelligence. And I could get deep into that. There's whole literature on what intelligence is. It gets a philosophical experiment, but that's kind of maybe a wishy-washy answer to your question, but it's not really well defined even within the computer science realm.
I think that brings up an interesting point, right? Like how even do we define just regular, if you will, intelligence? Like, and then if it's not intelligence, what are we just saying? Whoever's most human, the most human is the most intelligent.
Right. There's all kinds of discussion about what was it? Australia has decided that dolphins are intelligent, so they basically have human rights. There's, whatever our definition of intelligence is, it is going to be biased, of course, towards a species that's defining that intelligence. But I think we don't really have a good answer for it ourselves.
That is so interesting. Dolphins can get it, but not dogs. I got to read up on that. I got to read up on like what makes dolphins intelligent. With that, before we even get into algorithms, I'm really curious to hear from you about some of both the opportunities and challenges that you're seeing in your work that technology presents. I'm sure right now we're definitely seeing a lot of the benefits in terms of like it's bringing people together. Sometimes it does feel like that, but in your field, from your vantage point, what are some of the opportunities that technology presents, and what are some of the challenges?
I think the opportunities, particularly with everyone having to, be socially distanced. I mean, the fact that you and I can have this conversation and we may or may not ever meet in person. I think that's definitely a benefit of technology. It can bring people closer. It can solve problems that otherwise would not be solved. I mean, when we have large amounts of data that are out there, and we have the ability to extract, sometimes useful information from them and apply that for social good. I think that's, definitely a feather in the cap of advancement of technology. You could look at technology in terms of it has made things safer. We have computers in our cars, and they can register potential impacts. It can then deploy airbags, slow down the car automatically for you. Where are all those commercials about the car stopping because the driver wasn't paying attention? So, I mean, there's definitely advantages of technology as a tool, and I don't think that can be really disputed. One other thing about technology, I think, is that I say this cautiously, but in many ways it is a meritocracy. If you have the ability to build something interesting, then you have the ability to contribute to society. So it's not as much of a hindrance to becoming involved with it as maybe some other fields. Just off the top of my head, not trying to pick on, say, biology, but if you have a great idea for a biological experiment, finding materials, a lab, and running that type of experiment is not going to be as easy as if you have an interesting idea for a website or a program you'd like to write, or even an artificial intelligence algorithm you'd like to try out. And I mean, with artificial intelligence, you can just download the tools, and the vast majority of them are free. And as long as you have a computer that can run it, which, I guess we can also talk about, the availability of computers to, people. But in principle, the ability to get involved with artificial intelligence is, I'd say, a lower bar than I'd say any field out there at this point.
No, I think that's a very interesting point that you bring up in terms of like the barriers to entry are lower than some of the other science, just in terms of just being able, not even the barrier to entry, let me say the any barriers to develop and build upon what exists, because you are not going to necessarily get people to sign up to be test subjects, and you probably don't need an IRB to an internal review board. For technological research. That makes sense. What exactly is an algorithm, and how do algorithms function in our society? Where are they?
So an algorithm at the highest level is just a series of steps. If you are trying to cook a pizza, an algorithm might be, spread the dough, put the tomato paste on the dough, put the cheese on the tomato paste, put your ingredients on top, put it in the oven for 20 minutes. And any stepwise process from start to finish could be considered an algorithm. And the only difference between, say, an algorithm like that and an algorithm, say, in the computers, is just the language they're expressed in. And of course, you can look at the sophistication of, the algorithm. I mean, they're not always going to be as linear as that. But I mean, at a high level, some of these algorithms aren't so mysterious when you think about it. The recommendations we get from Amazon. I mean, the algorithm there is really as simple as, you log on Amazon, Amazon says, you bought a bunch of this stuff. This other person over here, they bought similar stuff, but they bought this thing that you didn't buy. Therefore, recommend that thing you didn't buy to you. I mean, the language to express that process and the coding behind it, that's an engineering process, and that's not trivial. But as far as understanding what's going on, it's not necessarily a hard concept. And that's really the case with actually a lot of these algorithms. We don't have to necessarily see them as this, black box that isn't accessible.
I feel like your description, right, it is helpful in terms of how you talk about making a pizza, right? It's a series of steps, probably, and has some level of ingredient to it along with the steps. With the other aspects of Amazon, and probably even some social media sites, there is I am acting upon the pizza to get a desired result. In these other instances, they're acting upon my psyche to get a desired result. So it's like there's a way in which communicate to, not even communicating to me, but having this algorithm set up to put something in front of me based on, I don't feel like it's just, I feel like that whole setup of like other people bought this, so this person might be interested is an aspect of it. But I feel like there's even, sometimes I feel like there's a psychological profile that is connected to those. And I'm like, what, that sort of thing. And then also, how does it connect to when I go to a site one time, I see ads of something from that site that I went? Is that part of also the algorithm? And can you talk a bit about the differences in, let's say, for example, an Amazon algorithm and a social media algorithm? Because Amazon wants me to buy stuff, and I'm assuming the social media site wants me to keep coming back.
Right.
And I'm really curious about the different aspects of our psychology that these algorithms are influencing.
Right. So I guess I might end up picking on Facebook for a little bit here. So what you're describing as far as the psychological currency that an algorithm is trying to harvest to keep you, scrolling on Facebook to generate ad revenue. I mean, that is an algorithm, and it is looking at what you click on, like and don't like, and it's trying to supply you those similar types of items that elicit the response that it's looking for. And Facebook is collecting a bunch of data on you, as is Amazon, as is Google, and they are creating a profile of quote unquote you. Now, whether they recognize it as you or just a specific computer and your IP address is tied to your account, I mean, it is tied to you in some form. And so they are trying to manage your behavior for an intended result. So yeah, I mean, that's definitely something to be aware of. One of the things that is, so there's this thing called an algorithmic bubble. And so the idea is that, I think this is most prevalent on Google recently. So the idea is that if you do a search on Google and you click a result, and so it gets an idea of what you like, what results you wanted. And so the next time you do a search, it's going to try to give you those same results. And so there's a experiment that was done. They looked at people who are traditionally on the progressive side of the political spectrum and put in a search term on their account. And so they get a certain amount of results, and those results tended to skew towards the progressive side of the political spectrum. And then they did the same thing with someone on the conservative side of the political spectrum, looked at their Google search results, and so those search results were on the conservative side. And so these algorithms are thus reinforcing, in many ways, the information that you've already provided to it. And so instead of it providing to you a, I'll say, objective view, it's really just reflecting back to you what you perhaps already giving to it.
Right. It's like it sounds from your description like it's building a technological echo chamber.
Yes.
What would be the benefit of that? Of
From
having,
our perspective, or from the commercial company's
from
perspective?
the commercial company's perspective, like for example, for Google, like why not be objective? Why not just, if I type in how to, and then it fills in the rest, my how to is the same as anybody else's how to on their computer, and it doesn't fill in something completely different. Like what would be Google's motivation for doing
So the
that?
motivation is to keep their customer base happy. If every time you do a search on Google and it returns results that you don't like or opinions that you don't agree with, but another search engine does, then you're going to use that other search engine. That's just kind of a human way of our being. I mean, we like to interact with opinions that are comfortable to us. We don't necessarily like to go out of our box without some effort. And so from a Google perspective or Facebook's perspective, it's just a matter of, keep the customer happy, keep them coming back, and we'll generate that ad revenue.
Wow. I mean, I find that so interesting, particularly just with general information. Like, I get that. It's so easy for me to make that connection with something, for example, like Amazon or any other of the websites that people go on where they're suggesting, or Netflix, watch this, that sort of thing. But with general information, it's like, it's not general, it's not objective. Speaking of not being general and objective, part of the topic is algorithmic bias. And earlier you talked about it, how formulaic it is. So how can it be biased if it's formulaic? And I think you kind of hinted on some of it just now in our conversation, but how can it be biased, and what is the motivation? Like why have a biased algorithm? Who would want that?
All right. So I guess the first thing I'll just say is that a lot of times this bias is not intentional. If you look at some of the very public gaffes, of, algorithmic bias making the press and embarrassing companies, it's not something they intended to do. What typically happens is that, so algorithms, again, are just a series of steps. And so one of the algorithms is, we could call it machine learning. Machine learning has a number of algorithms by which a computer learns how to do something. And much like we humans, a computer learns how to do something by being shown something and given the quote unquote right answer. And then later on, it's out on its own trying to elicit those right answers from data it hasn't seen before. So, concrete example, learning to recognize faces. So you show a computer a face and you say, this is a face. You show a computer another face, you say, this is a face. You show a computer something that's not a face, you say, this is not a face. And you keep doing this over and over again. Eventually the computer learns how to recognize faces versus non-faces. Now, the algorithm, if you feed it faces of everyone with light complexions, and so this was one of the big Google issues. Their training data was what we use to teach the algorithm. They fed it mostly white faces. And so the algorithm learned just by process of trying to figure out, okay, what is a face, what is not a face? And keep in mind, this is a computer that doesn't have life experience. It's just trying to look at these pictures and try to figure out how to distinguish face from not face. And so if you have all the faces tend to be white or light skinned, and it doesn't really get a chance to understand that a face can be dark skinned, then when it is presented with the dark face, it won't recognize that the possibility that a face can be dark skinned. But if you have at the same time shown other images, for example, in this case, it was apes and gorillas. Well, they tend to have, dark fur, darker features. Mm-hmm. And so the algorithm, just based on what it was taught, recognized the gorilla as, a black face in this particular case.
I mean, to me, it says, like, when you mentioned they have bias, but it's not like the computer itself doesn't have a specific intention, right? And maybe even the person who's programming it doesn't have a specific intention other than it being able to recognize faces.
Right.
But it seems like that is a huge blind spot. That it, like, how would a person not recognize we need to give this computer a variety of faces? How would that not come up as part of just scientific exploration?
Well, I mean, hindsight's always 20/20. I try not to be too hard on people doing, novel work. But yes, I mean, I think if you had a diverse team, and if you look at, the Googles, the Silicon Valleys, the vast majority of the people working there are going to be, not people of color. And I imagine that if you had people of color on that team training this algorithm, someone might have thought up the idea, well, why not take pictures of some faces that look like me? I mean, blind spots are blind spots because of, that's what we call them, because they are. If we could see them ahead of time, then, they wouldn't be blind spots. So again, it's definitely a function of oversight, having a blind spot and lack of diversity, I think, within certain spaces. It's definitely not something that's intentional in my experience. So it's just a situation in which you have to build the technology with care. And one of the things that I've even learned in my work, I mean, less public things than obviously, national company putting a tool out for anyone and everyone to use. I mean, anytime I do my own algorithms, make my own models, I have to make sure that the results I'm getting are truly representative of the problem I'm trying to solve. And so this is one place where one starts to have to dig into the data and look at, is this model biased towards one section of my training data for some reason that I may not notice? I remember previous job I had, they were trying to find which tools had cracks in them and which tools didn't. And you could look at that as a manual process. And it turns out that all the tools that had cracks in them had been taken a picture of in a certain way. So it had like this white border. And so the bias in that algorithm was not crack tool versus proper tool, but is there a white border or not? And so the algorithm worked very nicely until it started seeing crack tools that didn't have this nice white border. So it's these types of things that, looking back in hindsight, yeah, of course we should have, taken pictures of the tools in the same light, but it's not necessarily something that's easy to know ahead of time when you're in the middle of it.
How so I know how in social science, and I know how in chemical science, so to speak, or and even some cases natural science, how is validity tested if some of these things aren't investigated in the process of development?
Well, that's actually a pretty good question. That's become a very emphasized study within AI and computer science. This idea of how do we make sure that our results are are not biased. So okay, well, let me back up. So when we're teaching this algorithm, this computer, how to recognize faces or cats or dogs or whatever it is, we give it a bunch of training data, and then we give it what's called test data. And so we actually measure how well the algorithm works on the test data because the computer has never seen this test data before. And so that's kind of the first pass at making sure that it's working the way we expect it to. And now what's recent is this idea of, okay, well, now we need to go beyond that. So yes, it gets good numbers as accuracy as on this test data. But are the results that we're getting biased in some way? They're skewed in some way based on the type of data that it's interacting with. And so there's a number of technologies out there now. We want to look at, how do we make sure it's valid from a technological point of view? I mean, there are tools out there now that'll actually go through the different types of inputs that an algorithm can receive. And instead of just giving it a big old test set and say, what is your accuracy on this test set? It'll break that test set up into different pieces. And so it might find that, oh, this algorithm performs really nicely on this one piece, but so very badly on this other piece. And so then it gives you a hint, well, maybe we should look at this set of tests that it's not performing well on, even if it is doing a bang up job on the others. And so this allows a practitioner then to focus in on, well, what's wrong with the algorithm here and how to focus on that. Because if that subset of test data happens to be, say, all the black faces, then that's obviously something that needs to be rectified. And so that's one way of trying to make sure that these algorithms are solving a problem that they're intended to solve.
What are some of the other ways in which algorithmic bias shows up? And like, not even how it shows up in the process, but the end result of it, right? So one of the end results, it sounds like from the thing that you're mentioning, is just misrecognition
Sure.
of folks. What are some of the other end results of algorithmic bias, if I can say the word?
So anywhere that you're using machine learning to automate processes, you have that potential. So there was Amazon, I believe it was Amazon, I'm sorry if it's not Amazon, but they were using algorithms to sort or score their resumes. And they seeded the resumes, their model with resumes that they already had. We know who their good workers are at Amazon. And so we'll train a computer to find resumes that are similar to those. If you imagine what Amazon looks like out in Silicon Valley, it just doesn't necessarily look like the rest of the population as a whole. Mm-hmm. And so what the algorithm was reinforcing what Amazon already had. And so the bias was towards the demographics that already existed at Amazon, for example. You could also look at predictive policing. I mean, that's a big thing that's becoming more to light as algorithms are being used within the police departments. And so how are we going to decide where to put law enforcement officers in order to be in place to deal with crime? Well, wherever you have more law enforcement officers, you would imagine that you'll probably get more reports of crime because they're there to deal with it. If you feed that into the algorithm, that's kind of reinforcing, oh, this place had a lot of crime, well, let's put some more cops there. Oh, this place had a lot of crime, let's put more cops there. So there's that type of thing. I think another big one, a friend of mine is a judge, and she tells me that she has to work with this tool in order to make sentencing guidelines based upon the data that's fed into the algorithm. And that data isn't necessarily balanced or, unbiased, and it's, not exactly transparent. And so sometimes she has to give sentences, and she's noticed that she has to give sentences that she feels are not necessarily what she would do, but they tend to be skewed in certain ways that makes her uncomfortable. So, I mean, those are, just three examples off the top of my head that, definitely can affect, everyday life, in many ways.
I think those are huge. I think those three examples are really huge, particularly when one of the things that it brings up for me is the ways in which it is predicting trends, not necessarily providing solutions. And I think in the situation with the policing, it sounds like they are using past information to predict a trend, but this is not, it doesn't sound preventative, for example. I'm not, and I guess the reasoning around it being used in law enforcement is, I don't know if that's for efficacy or just for consistency of how punishment, I should say, is distributed. But I think that's interesting. And I feel like another point that some of what you're saying brings up for me is, yes, this is technology, and people like to say things like technology doesn't lie, and or the numbers don't lie, or this is just a machine. But there's still people who are programming this, who are saying what we feed the machine, and how that, that then impacts the data that comes out.
And what you feed the machine, and also how you deal with the results. I mean, you can feed the machine good information, but still use the results in an irresponsible way. So that's another aspect to bear in mind as well.
Absolutely. Someone asks, do you see the possibility of technology/data being merged into a human? Example, human having computer chips inserted under the skin, and the chip communicates with a cell phone. Now he or she can think of a person, and the phone will call the person that they thought of.
Sure. So there's a whole field called brain-computer interfacing, which I had some interest in for a little bit. Not that I got to do much with it, but I would read up a little bit. And so at a previous job, I was actually kind of keeping track of some work they were doing where implants in the brain were being used to control prosthetics. So someone comes back from, I think it was someone came back from Iraq, and they had lost an arm. And so the work being there was that we could put a chip in the brain, or actually, I think it was actually outside the brain. So it was, I think it was a passive reading, but the individual had the ability to use his brain waves to control the prosthetic. So I don't think that's a far cry from, having the ability to control your cell phone. And in fact, this reminds me of an experiment that was done some time ago. They used monkeys, and they put, I forget how it was, diodes within the brain, or again, just electrodes on the outside of the brain. But the monkeys were able to control the computer cursor, from across the country just by thinking in a certain way. And so you train the monkey to, move this cursor in order to get a reward. So yeah, I think the ability to control external devices with just your brain is something that is here. And, whether it becomes commercial now or, 10 years from now, I think it's definitely a path that we're on.
That makes sense. I mean, there's ways in which it's like, oh my gosh, that's so far out, but also like it makes sense because when I lift my hands or move right now, I don't necessarily think, I mean, I'm thinking about it, but I don't know that there's like a little something that goes all the way down my arm and says lift, or you know what I mean? So it could just as easily be a chip, for all I know, already there. Edwin Perez, like your comment around build technology with care.
Mm.
On this point that someone else brought up around the artificial intelligence and technology, what are some of the trends that you're currently seeing in artificial intelligence, and what is like cutting edge, what like people are working on it now and we might see it in a decade or so?
So I think when I first started getting deep into artificial intelligence, the big push was computer vision. So how do we get a computer to recognize images, respond to images? And that's made a whole lot of progress in the past few years to the point where, you put a MRI in front of a computer vision algorithm and it can find points of interest with more accuracy than a doctor at this point. So that's something that I don't think that problem is necessarily solved, but I mean, we are to the point where, I mean, that's something that is very well established. What I see now is more of push towards natural language processing. And so how do you get a computer to understand written words or spoken words so that, you see Star Trek, computer, make me a latte, and it gives you that. And so, one thing that just came out, which is kind of interesting, is the ability for computers to not only understand our language, but for it to generate its own. So there's a this GPT-3 is a new algorithm that just came out. It's the successor to GPT-2. But the idea is that if you feed this algorithm some words, it'll then kind of continue from what was written. So you could feed it something like it was a dark and stormy night, and the algorithm from there will continue to write the story. And again, it's just basically having been trained on all kinds of books and texts and things like that, but it finds some reasonable continuations. And so you'll see articles out there about how GPT-3 is writing, newspaper articles, which is partially true. But I think the ability for AI to just tell us how to interpret what it's given, but to generate new things is probably the cutting edge at this point. You probably heard of deep fakes. I mean, that's the computer vision analogy to the natural language processing example I just told you about. And so you look at generative adversarial networks. I mean, that's a way for a neural network to try to train itself to fool itself. And so that's how you get these very high fidelity images of celebrities that you may have seen. It's the same type of technology that's used to create these videos that look real, even though they're not. You may have seen a video of, for example, Barack Obama mouthing the words of the other person in the room. And so the computer has learned to take past images of Barack Obama and move his lips to match the words that he actually never said. So those types of applications come immediately to mind as far as what may be the next wave of applications.
Do you see any influences from, I'm into sci-fi. Do you ever see any influences from like sci-fi? Like, I feel like there's so much of like old Star Trek where it's just like, oh, this is basically what we have now. Or I'll see those, I know one of the things that was really big in early 2000s were like holograms and like people solving stuff and like moving it, and that whole thing was all over. Yeah, exactly. Minority Report. That sort of thing was all over the place. And now I watch, I mean, not to this level, but I watch when I watched the last election, there was a lot of TV screen and they're just using this. I mean, it's not 3D, but they're still like playing with their big toy. Predicting this precinct is this and this is this and this. Are you seeing, from your vantage point, connections between the sci-fi world and real life technology explorations, or not really?
Oh, sure. I mean, go back to Star Trek, computer laying a course for, Kronos, and
Yes.
it figures out how to get there, right? I mean, that's,
Yeah.
A routing algorithm. And, that's something that AI, is known for. One of our canonical problems is the traveling salesman problem. How do you get from one place to another in the most efficient amount of time? The ability, again, for computers to respond to your vocal commands, to answer questions that you pose. I mean, it's one thing to tell a computer, turn left, or, tell a robot turn left, and it figures out what you mean to turn left. But to ask a computer, computer, why aren't you turning left, or where are you going? what is wrong, this type of thing. So the computer has to take your words, access whatever information it has, and then respond to you with a coherent response. I mean, the question and answer stuff, I mean, that's something that's pretty cutting edge nowadays that people are working on. So you may have been on websites where they have automated chatbots. And so you type into the chatbot, you're not just saying, hello. I mean, you're actually expecting a response. You're asking it a question and you expect it to give you a decent response, or either that or direct you to a human. But I mean, that level of artificial intelligence, I think, has been inspired by, many a dream of anyone creating a sci-fi TV show.
Yeah, I mean, even to like Knight Rider.
Yes.
Kit, my car talks to me now, and I don't always like it.
Does it
But
come to you when you call it?
so, no, it does
You
not.
come from the parking garage, Kit,
I
come meet
can't,
me
and I
outside.
can't call it from my phone or from my watch phone. That was a thing too.
Yeah.
Being able to talk from your phone. The way in which we definitely use Siri and Alexa to.
Right.
And I find that Siri and Alexa have gotten so much more interesting. So I don't remember if it was Siri or Alexa that I talked to, but I asked them a question about the other, and they badmouthed the other one. And it was like, this is great. I mean, I know somebody programmed it, but this is
That might
great.
be hard-coded.
Might be. It might be. And then there was one where I said, Siri, do you have a boyfriend? And she said, this is not about me. This is about you, or something like that. And I was just like, this is amazing and awesome. I recently just got a MacBook Pro, the newer version of it. And it's fingerprint now.
Mm-hmm.
Like to turn it on. So like so many of these things that I'm seeing now, it's just like, oh my gosh, this is like, so I'm in the future. And then I watch stuff like Back to the Future, and I don't have a flying hoverboard like Michael J. Fox did. Flying cars, Dr. Holder, I need you to get on it. Where's my flying car? So stuff like that. So I love seeing those particular connections. Before I let you go, I really want to hear more about the your annual Minority Innovation Weekend that you have coming up. When is that? How can people connect with it? What is it about? First, talk about what exactly is the Minority Innovation Weekend. Why does it exist? And then tell us when is it happening?
Okay. So, so getting back to the National Society of Black Engineers, my local chapter here in Baltimore, this was back in 2017, I want to say, was when we had the first one. And so the idea was that we had a number of members who were interested in starting their own business. So we're all, been through school, been working hard, learning our craft. And it would be nice to perhaps make money for ourselves as opposed for someone else. So entrepreneurship, right? And so the first year, it was basically just
connections before. Sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry, a one-day workshop. And that was successful. And so from there, it's expanded. So I actually joined the planning committee in 2018. And we expanded it to the point where we, in addition to just giving what we consider startup fundamentals, we also tried to involve subject matter experts, technologists, and entrepreneurs in some other tracks. So we had a track for cybersecurity and machine learning. Last year, we had one for healthcare. And so the idea is that we want to create an environment where entrepreneurs, technologists, and subject matter experts can come together, learn about a particular field, think about potential solutions, and hopefully, spark an idea that could be used as part of the business plan, or either just support for startups and entrepreneurs that already exist. And we really focus on people of color because the environment for entrepreneurs of color is different than I would say the majority demographic. A lot of it has to do with the fact that we have less access to some of the funding, and that's for systematic and historical reasons, as well as just the fact that you could. So my colleague, he always talks about the critical friends and family round of funding. Where's that first seed of money you get from? Well, a lot of people, it comes from their friends and family, and if you're from a demographic that historically does not have the assets, then that may be harder to come by. And so how do we meet those challenges? So this is what Minority Innovation Weekend tries to address. Tries to network with both other entrepreneurs and fundraisers. And then also, how do you go about building a startup, and how do you go about getting the ideas and then turning those ideas into something that can be a startup. So that's kind of the broad idea. It's October 3rd and 4th. And this year, in response to the pandemic, it's going to be completely online. So whereas before it was always at the University of Baltimore, this year, anyone, in the world can attend. And if you go to minorityinnovationweekend.org, you can learn more about it and register there.
Awesome. I'm sure everyone, like, aren't half of the people there coming with their apps? Like, they just developed an app. I feel like everybody and their grandma are developing apps. It's like the biggest thing. I feel like it's the biggest thing in terms of, like, not necessarily the most impactful. Maybe so, because I have apps on everything.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm wondering, I wonder about does that have just a lower barrier to entry than other forms of innovation when it comes to technology?
I would say that the big reason for the proliferance of apps is just that everyone has a phone in their pocket at all times. And so the ability to reach your customer probably requires, in many cases, an app if you want that level of engagement. So, and then the phone itself brings a number of features. So for example, 2 years ago, there was a startup at Minority Innovation Weekend, and he was looking at how do we help people with their health. And he was looking at being able to measure someone's oxygenation in their blood, as well as some other tricks that can help you determine if you're having, some sort of health issue that maybe you should address with your doctor. And so you could carry around a big, secondary device, or you could, with the phone you already have, maybe you have a feature that has the ability to, to shine light on your, so one of the ideas that you shine light on your skin, and the amount of reflection you get based upon the blood under the skin gives you a sense of the oxygenation. So
Wow.
you could so potentially your phone could do something like that, because your phone has a flashlight. And if you have an app on your phone that can do that, you don't need to carry around, another third-party device. And so I think apps is not necessarily the end-all be-all, but I think there is a reality that most of us have, a phone on us on a regular basis, and thus there's a convenience factor that I think apps are trying to exploit.
Mm-hmm. No, that makes total sense. One person asked a question. It moved quickly, but I remember the general aspect of it. They asked the question of, have you heard about some algorithm in Texas that is able to predetermine who will be criminals?
Oh, yes, that's actually been in the news. If we're talking about the same thing, what's going on is that there is a sheriff who has taken advantage of algorithms, and those algorithms are telling him basically who are likely offenders. And so it's looking at, people that have had previous records. I don't know what else is in the black box there. And so this kind of goes back to what we were saying before about, you can feed in information, and that information can be good or bad, but then there's also what you do with that information coming out. And so let's say the information was good. I'll give him a pass and say the information was worth putting in the algorithm. I'm not convinced of that, but going with that, what he's doing with that information, he's actually going out and harassing people, and thus trying to make their lives miserable so that they end up leaving his district. And so if you're going to use an algorithm, that's probably definitely the wrong way to go about taking those results and acting on them. I mean, there's other ways that I could think of that you could take information like that. If someone's likely to reoffend, there's usually some underlying reason. There's any number of studies will tell you that crime is most directly tied to poverty and opportunity. And so if this person is likely to reoffend, maybe you make sure they have access to a job. Maybe you get them some support so they can pay their bills. And so that would be the appropriate way to use the results of such an algorithm. And so if you have an algorithm like that, I think, again, you have to be careful with what you do with that information.
It sounds like it's a way of legitimizing and reinforcing stereotypes. It's like it says, this is a set of people. There's this pattern. This computer told me that they're going to do that. Ergo, I'm just following what the machine says.
Yeah, there's a lot of ways algorithms are used as this oracle, this black box, and whatever it says must be true. I think we as a population, we really need to do a better job of becoming technically literate. And that just means understanding what's going on in that black box. It's really just a lot of math. It's not, there's no deep divine insight that's going on with the computer. It's just an algorithm. It's running crunching numbers, and it's giving you basically a statistical response that reflects what the status quo is. And we talked about that a little bit, before. And so once we understand what's going on, it's not something that we have to just take at face value. We can ask questions of it. We can challenge the assumptions that the algorithm was built on, and we can challenge the actions that are taken as a result of the results of those algorithms.
Mm-hmm. I think that that's the key part, right? Like how we interact with those results. For example, if we're using something like the school to prison pipeline, if they're using grades in school to predetermine how many jails should be built based on low performance produces this, it could have our response to that information makes a difference. Like you said, this connection to crime with low opportunity and high poverty, do something around that. Like, I think that that's a great point. There's a few comments that I want to make sure I get to. Someone says there's a company that has embedded chips into their employees willingly. I believe they have GPS, so it communicates with the satellite. I can't imagine that couldn't be re-engineered to work as a phone, especially since we have new. And then the comment goes on. And then another comment says the government actually offers huge grants for all kinds of research that essentially merge the human brain with machines, currently aimed at veterans who have lost limbs. I wonder if those are the places where I feel like one of the things that I hear is that the advancements happen not the fastest. Well, there's a technological advances that the military gets before we get. For example, cell phones, is my understanding that they had those way before it was like generally accessible. And I could totally see how you were saying with prosthetic limbs, like how that would be a place, you know what I mean? Like just a really good place to start. And I'm also curious, I'm trying to fit like 15 questions in this last 4 minutes. Also, how far are we from self-driving cars? Let us have it.
Well, we anyways already have them. So I forget which states, but there are certain states now that allow self-driving cars to be tested on the roads. I want to say it's Nevada. If you look at some of the algorithms available in Tesla, you have to be behind the seat, but it'll drive for you. As I understand, I don't have one, but as I understand it, it's best on highway driving. So it's not to the point where you can just put in a destination and it'll drive you from your house to the store.
Mm-hmm.
From a algorithmic point of view, as far as the route goes, that's not hard. Well, it's not the hardest part. The hard part is going to be, having a car that can get from one place to another and not run over anybody. So I hear people say 5 years. I hear people say 10 years. So I think it'll be within our lifetime. They're already replacing trucks that carry cargo with, driverless trucks. So I think we're definitely getting there. And to your point about, the military, I think you look at the innovations that have come, a lot of it has come from war in the military, either that or large projects like, say, we're going to go to the moon. And so once we define these large goals, whether it be winning a war or doing something like going to the moon, then the research that comes out of that in many ways can be applied in interesting and novel ways that weren't necessarily what was originally intended. And that, many times it's for good.
Right. No, I'm here for it. I am here for if we're seeking something great, grand, and grandiose, and we accomplish that. And in the process of becoming, we make all of these other innovative things that allow me to have a nice filter on my phone. I'm not mad at it. I'm not mad if that came from some fight that people had.
Well, if you're going to do it, at least some good comes out of it, right?
Right, you know what I mean? Let me get a nice glow up out of the situation. I'm not all the way mad. Thank you again so much for your time. Could you please remind folks about the weekend that you were talking about? I know you said it was October 3rd and 4th.
Yep.
It is free and open to the public.
Mhm.
Say what that is, and also share with people how can they follow, contact, IG, friends. How can they stalk you on social media and mess up your algorithm?
Oh, okay. Well, I appreciate that. Yeah. So Minority Innovation Weekend, just minorityinnovationweekend.org. It's October 3rd and 4th, completely online. So go to the website, you can register. I think there's an early bird registration going on until the 18th, if I remember right. And so that would be, I think, $50. And then after that, I think it goes up to like 75. And that's basically 2 days of talks about, we have environmental innovation, healthcare innovation, cybersecurity, startup fundamentals.
I know you said it was October. Sorry.
October 3rd and 4th, yep. And I think the other thing is you should be aware of, if you even just follow our site, we have a number of panels leading up to and after that are free. And so we just had a panel on women of color doing technical innovation. And so that's actually available as a recording if you want to go back and look at that. So we're trying to expand beyond the conference. And as far as getting in touch with me, you can find me on Facebook, Robert Holder. And my email address is holder1@umbc.edu. And definitely happy to engage folks on this topic. I really enjoy talking about it.
Awesome. One of the folks asked the question, would you allow your consciousness to be downloaded when your body dies?
Oh, so either this person has been watching Black Mirror, or
there's a few where that's happened. Captain America, wasn't there a dude? He had his consciousness downloaded into he was part of. Was it with Captain America?
Yeah, I'm actually I'm not deep into Marvel, unfortunately.
Not really Marvel, okay.
But yeah, Black Mirror had an episode. It's actually called San Juniper, I want to say, and the idea was that it was actually kind of a ethical question, but basically there was this commercial company, and when you were dying, you could download your consciousness and basically live inside this computer world, and you had the ability to change your appearance and your age and what time frame you wanted to live in, and find love. It actually was a very so Black Mirror typically tends to be pretty dark, but this was actually a pretty uplifting story. Yeah. So would I download my consciousness? That's an interesting question. I guess I would want to know, do I have the ability to stop being conscious at some point? I mean, I think I would like to live longer than the statistical 80 years that I probably have. But I don't know if I want to live, for the age, of a computer, thousands of years. So it would be an interesting question. I would be intrigued. I think it's worth considering, but I would be more familiar.
Think about it.
Yeah.
Someone says, so weird. It's fine when I go to minorityinnovationweekend.org on Chrome, but on Firefox, I get a message that says, warning potential security risk.
Oh, wow. They haven't fixed that yet. So go ahead and click through. That's a known issue. I thought that actually had been resolved. I'll get on the website team about that.
But they said it's fine they don't have that issue on Chrome.
Okay.
Black Mirror has done quite a few. I know that there was one that was done where the consciousness was downloaded into like a doll or some other inanimate object. Mm-hmm. That one was really good. I really like that one, even though that was dark. It was like vengeful. And
there was even a darker one where basically you could create your own enslaved being by making a copy of your consciousness,
right,
and putting it into a computer, and so force it to do your bidding.
That one was tricky for me, mm-hmm. because it was like, so of course there's this way in which we say, and we've been, in sci-fi, they've explored this even way back when, like data, like is data real? And they had that whole trial.
Sure. Measure of a man, yep.
Yeah, look at you. Okay, I see you out here with your knowing your trick.
I mean, I try to keep up with you.
You got it. So I know that they've had these like different ways in which of like uh deciding that it's okay to treat this. I don't know, there's some movies where they talk about I'm not an android, I'm a robot, or you know what I mean, like how human are you, or how human you aren't. That episode, I would so love to have another me anticipating my needs and being able to just like know how to communicate with me and stuff like that. But the problem with that is that I would still have my desire, my will, my, you know, my humanness, if you will,
Mhm.
and would not want to be split in that way. I feel like one of the things that I really appreciate about the things like Black Mirror and have you watched any of Electric Dreams?
A little bit, yes.
So Electric Dream is really good, probably not at the same level in terms of story development as some of the Black Mirror episodes. But I love the ways in which science and fiction, one, push our ability to think beyond what is currently here and possible, and also have us think about it in a social context.
Right.
Like, how will our world be impacted? Like, there was the one of the Black Mirrors where the you needed a certain amount of likes or popularity in order to get like,
Yes.
yeah, like how is all of these how are these aspects of these technological advancements then impacting our world?
That's happening in China now. Have you heard about that?
No.
Yeah, social currency. I don't forget exactly what they call it, but it's similar to the idea. I mean, they measure your social standing based upon your actions. And so that gives you, that social capital that was in that episode. And with that, that gives you privileges within, you know, how much do you, how are you allowed to travel? How much do you pay for certain things? And there's a bunch of cameras, out that track what you're doing. And so it's constantly monitoring your behavior.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is so crazy, but not. And here's why I say it's not, Robert, because I feel like there are so many unspoken, undirectly measured uh, methods of social currency that exist currently, like already, that we just don't we just don't attribute likes or points. I feel like there's a way in which technology has really just found a way to quantify it. um and I think that it's like, wow, that's like crazy, but it's like, no, we're kind of doing it. Like, there's a certain currency that a person gets if they're considered more traditionally attractive, or if they're taller, or if they smile, or if they're extroverted. There's just like all of these things that you get that have real life applications: raises, promotions,
Definitely.
access, relationships, marriages, that impact the quality of life that just hasn't been measured yet. So it's like, that's spooky of China to be doing that, but not really, because we're already doing that.
Yeah, to a certain degree, I suppose that's probably
Yeah.
the case. So
Yeah. Okay. So someone said if you mess up in China, you must literally pay to make amends. Someone else says some people think Black Mirror was actually influenced by the policy that was already being talked about that happened in China. Oh, that episode you're saying? Okay. Bye for real this time, because it's 7 minutes after. Thank you again so much. Such a really great conversation. I really want to talk more with you about sci-fi and technology whenever you
yeah,
have
that'd be fun.
free.
So thanks so much for having me, and happy birthday again, and hopefully we can definitely connect in the future.
I look forward to it. Thank you again, and have a good night.
You as well. Take care.
I need to know everything, who and the what and the where, I need everything. Trust me, I hear what you're saying, but act like it's new what you're telling me. I'm curious, George, I hop in the Porsche, 5 and a horse, I'm ready for war, I'm coming for throats, to turn to a ghost, I need to know everything.